All right, everyone. Well, thank you for being with us this day. This, of course, is Palm Sunday in the majority of the Christian traditions. Of course, the Eastern traditions observe a different calendar, and that goes back to that goes back ages to an argument over whether the lunar calendar was actually correct or whether the liturgical correct calendar was the one they should follow. And due to errors in calculating the calendars, the two separated. So the east goes by the actual cycle of the moon, and the west goes by the dates set by the established church. And what we want to talk about today is we want to talk about nothing can stop us. Nothing can stop us when we are in in the zone, if you will, when we are in communication with the divine, when the divine is using us for its purpose, if we want to think of it in that way, when when we have allowed a divine idea to catch hold of us and to express itself through us and as us, nothing can stop us. Because it's not us that's being stopped, nor is it us that is doing the work. It is, as Jesus said, it is not me, but it is the Father within me. It is the Spirit within me. It is essentially trust. You and I cannot beat our hearts by an act of will or volition. We cannot add an inch to our height. We cannot change the color of our hair. But there is a knower and a doer within that does all things. And what we have to recognize is that in our human experience, when we identify with ourselves as being just human, I'm only human, that kind of an idea, we let things get in the way of that which is in itself unstoppable. So in the New Testament, there is a line of scripture. It's in Galatians. And it goes something, I'm paraphrasing, but it goes something like this. It says, you were running the good race. You were running the good race. What did you let hinder you? What did you let get in the way? And it wasn't God. It wasn't God that got in the way. Something else got in the way. Excuse me. And what they were talking about there, what the author was talking about is he was writing to a group of people who had converted to Christianity, and they were very enthusiastic. You know, they were excited about this idea. And then they kind of went back to their old ways. They kind of started to get caught up in the old customs. Do we need to eat a certain diet? Do we need to follow certain rituals that come from the old customs? And I believe it was Paul was writing to them, and he said, why did you let these things get in your way? Did they come to you from God? You were running the good race. You were excited. You were moving forward. But your intellect got a hold of you, and you started to go back to old ways and say, well, we need to do the old things and we need to do the new things. And basically they allow themselves to get stuck, to be stopped. Now, if you look at the New Testament's passages that have to deal with Palm Sunday, the whole festival of Palm Sunday, to me it's talking about the same thing. People were very, very excited, according to the narrative painted for us in the New Testament Gospels. People were very, very excited when Jesus came into Jerusalem riding on a donkey, and they were waving palm branches and all these things. But within a few days, they had completely abandoned him. They had completely turned their back to him, were willing to call for his death. And to me, it kind of signifies the same human consciousness, the same ideas that we as human beings in our human nature, when we identify with that human nature and stay in that human nature, we get awfully excited sometimes about doing something. But in a short while, we lose that enthusiasm. We lose that excitement. we go back to our old ways. In Aesop's fable, he gave us the sour grapes. We want something and we want it and we want it, and then we can't have it. And we decide, well, it probably wasn't any good anyway. Those grapes were sour anyway. And if we look at the psychology, if we look at human psychology, if we look at how change occurs in human beings, there's a strategy by which human beings, or there's a process at least, by which human beings become the way they are. And then there is a very specific strategy that we use as human beings to stay the way we are, to resist change, to keep from changing. And then finally, there is a process by which we can actually change. And it's very interesting because I heard a minister out at a Silmar one year, and he was talking about what is the appeal of horror movies to people. What is this whole genre of horror movies? Why do people go to the movie and pay to go see horror movies? And the way he was describing it is that it seems that human nature wants two things. It wants change and it wants things to stay the same. It wants change and it wants things to stay the same. And in the horror movies, they're predictable. Everybody knows. If you're watching the horror movie and the teenagers go for a midnight skinny dip out in the pond at the summer camp, you know that the monster is going to be hiding in the woods or come up out. That. So there's this consistency. But then there's the element of surprise. There is the shock when Jason in a ski mask appears. There he is, And it's almost as if as human beings, we're fighting against ourselves. There's a part of us that the other part doesn't know, and they want two different things at times. And we kind of wrestle with that. But in the business of change, a couple things happen. If the change is not our idea, if a change is thrust upon us, we go through the stages of grief. We go through denial, anger, bargaining, and then finally acceptance. And think about this in terms of if you look at corporate America and all of a sudden the rumors start. You say, there's a layoff coming. I heard it through the grapevine. There's a layoff coming. First thing people say is, oh, don't believe that. Why are you believing that for? You're just rumor mongering. Don't even think about that. Well, then finally, it leaks out, and then they can't keep it contained anymore, and then there's an announcement, yes, we will be restructuring, there will be some downsizing, everybody will be taken care of, they'll be given a package and all these kind of things. And then what people do is they say, well, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me, that applies to those people over there. What about those people in that other branch office over in this other town? They're the ones that need to be laid off, not us. They can't lay us off, we're too valuable. Again, it's denial, we're at the stage of denial. And they go through that until finally it happens to them, and then they get angry. Well, why did this happen to me? Why didn't it happen to somebody else? And so that's the process of change. If the change isn't our idea, if it's something that's thrust upon us from the outside. When the change is our idea, we go through a totally different process, and the first step is unbridled optimism. Unbridled optimism. This is the greatest idea in the world. I am so excited about this. I can't wait to get started about this. I just want to throw myself into it completely. And then the next stage is unbridled pessimism. In the next stage we go, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? Why did I sign up? Why did I sign that contract? Why did I buy all this stuff to start this business and all these other things? And we go from everything's wonderful and nothing's going to stop us and this is a great success to everything's terrible, nothing's going to succeed, this is going to be a great failure. We get depressed. We go into it, we get depressed. And then finally in that stage what happens is the next stage is called informed hope. We start to look at it and say, well, maybe there is a way that this will work, and maybe if I did this, and maybe if I did that, and maybe if I did the other thing, maybe I could make this work. And then we start to find ways that it will work. And then the last stage is performance. The last stage is we actually complete and get going. Now, a lot of times people stop right at the unbridled pessimism stage. What did hinder you? Why did you stop? You were running a good race. Why did you stop? And the reason why we stop and the reason why we go through those things, I believe, is that what we are doing is we are thinking of the whole idea in human terms, in our human identity. So there is an I that I recognize as myself. I recognize my body as myself, when in fact it's not, but we do that. We stand in front of the mirror and we say, oh my goodness, I'm putting on a few pounds or whatever. And there's this I that we identify with that is the human I. And the human I, the human ego, thinks it has to do these things by itself. It has to figure all of these things out. So we think we're going to go into a business and we immediately begin our project management phase. We begin to organize it. I once went on a sailing trip with a gentleman who was from Eastern Europe, and he had actually taught sailing on the tall ship that the Polish Naval Academy used. And every year Poland and England would send half of their cadets to each other's country. So each of their tall ships had a crew that was half Polish and half English. And he was talking about how in the United States, he said, in his view, Americans were terribly spoiled by comparison to the Eastern Europeans. He said in the United States, if you wanted a piece of hardware for your boat, you went down to the hardware store and you bought it. He says where he came from, if you needed a piece of hardware for the boat, you had to organize it. You had to develop a project plan as to how you were going to get that piece of hardware. You had to think about who you knew, who might know somebody who taught in the metal shop in high school, and maybe they could use the facilities in the high school and get the students to make you a piece of hardware. So what he was saying is the mind, it wasn't so easy, and the mind immediately went to figuring out all of these different ways and things that it had to manipulate and things that it had to do to get that simple piece of hardware. And we do that in our human course of action. We get an idea and we think this is an idea that we're going to go and pursue, and then we immediately start trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do it? How are we going to get the money? Are we going to borrow the money? Is somebody going to give us the money? All of these things. And when we do that, then we realize that it's probably more difficult than we imagined at the beginning, and we start to go into the phase of unbridled pessimism. And what we're forgetting at that moment, what we're doing is we are forgetting our divine nature. We are forgetting the omnipotence of God. Nothing can stop God. What can stand in the way of that which is all powerful? Nothing. What problems do we have that need to be solved in order for this project to be completed? And do we think that omniscience, all wisdom, all knowing, knows how to do this? So what we do is we separate our human I amness from the divine I am that is the true I of our being. And we allow ourselves to be hindered. We allow ourselves to be bogged down. I was at a ministers' conference one time in Atlanta, and the speaker was talking about divine ideas, when divine ideas come to us. And she said, when God puts forward a seed, that seed contains everything that is necessary for it to thrive. Now think about that. When you take an acorn, which is the seed of an oak tree, you take an acorn and you look at it and you hold it in your hand. Not only are you holding an acorn, but you're holding an oak tree. An oak tree that is expressing its life at that moment as an acorn. But more than that, if that acorn is put into the ground, there's something within the acorn and there's something within the ground. There's an intelligence. And by intelligence, I mean the ability to act appropriately, to do what's appropriate at the time. Right? There's an intelligence that is functioning in the acorn and in the soil, albeit at a chemical level, but there's an intelligence in there that knows how to act appropriately, that knows how to crack open that crusty shell. Seed has a crusty shell, and that crusty shell is protecting it until it is the right time for it to sprout. And then the shell cracks open. See? And the little oak tree puts its shoots down, its roots down into the soil, where it can draw from the soil the moisture and the minerals and the nutrition that it needs to express itself differently. And at some point it pokes its head up through the ground and it continues to grow into a mighty tree. But when that tree matures, it too produces acorns. Thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of acorns over the lifetime of a tree. So now you consider in that tiny acorn that you're holding in your hand, you're not just holding one acorn, but you're holding an oak tree and hundreds of thousands of acorns. And as those other acorns drop to the soil and sprout at the appropriate time and become oak trees, they in turn produce hundreds of thousands of more acorns. And if you get caught into the mysticism of the moment, you realize that in that tiny acorn, you're holding an entire forest. And you don't have to do anything on your own to make that happen, other than to put the seed in the right environment. There is an intelligence in the seed, there's an intelligence in the soil. There is something there that is pressing out. That forest is in the acorn, and it desires to be expressed. It is pushing out, and it will be expressed. And nothing is going to stop it. Nothing is going to stop it. Because there's a force behind it that is unstoppable. There is a force behind it that is unchangeable or immutable, as Emma Curtis Hopkins would tell us. I grew up in an area near the coast, and the land that the houses were on was mostly marsh and sand, and the sea oats grow up in the sand. You've been down to the beach and you've seen the sea oats growing along the dunes, and they push up. And if you look at the sea oats, the tube is hollow. It's like a straw that the sea oats have with a little tassel on the top when they're mature. Now, where we lived, every once in a while people would get the idea that they were going to extend their yard. Most houses didn't have yards. They had decks out over the water, but there were a few houses that were built entirely on land. And the owners decided that they were going to reclaim some of the natural area around their house and put it to another purpose. And one gentleman decided that he wanted to put in an above-ground swimming pool in back of his house. So he went in this marshy, sandy area, and they brought in fill dirt, and they covered a patch big enough for the pool with fill dirt. And then they came and they got an asphalt truck, and the asphalt truck came and put down, a quarter to a half inch of blacktop asphalt all over this fill dirt that they had put in on top of the marsh and the sea oats. And then they went and they erected the above ground pool. I'm talking about. It has a liner in it and it has metal sides that go around it. And they filled the pool with water and they were using it to swim. And then they noticed that the water was disappearing from the pool. And at first they thought it must have been evaporation, and they kept running the hose and filling the pool. And then what happened is they couldn't fill it fast enough. The hose couldn't run fast enough to fill the pool, and the pool emptied out. And what they found when the pool emptied out is that the sea oats, which are like a hollow tube, and can push through a solid substance. If you've ever, when you were a kid, if you've ever done the experiment of pinching a straw and sticking it through a potato, it's the same kind of idea. But the sea oat had pushed up through the fill dirt, through the asphalt, through the vinyl liner of the pool, and into the water. There's something unstoppable in the urge of that sea oat to express life. It would not be denied. It found a way to overcome all of the obstacles that human consciousness had put in its way. Now here's a creature that we would think is very simple, and therefore it's not very bright. How would it know? How could it know how to do these things? And yet it outsmarted the fill dirt, the asphalt, and the vinyl liner. It was as if it was saying, this is my spot, not your pool. This is my spot. I belong here, and I will not be denied. Think about it. We pave our streets, we put concrete in our driveways, we build our houses, and then we are constantly making repairs against the elements. The wind and the water breaks up the concrete, the ice comes and cracks it. Little plants come along, little ants come along, everything comes along and starts to break up the thing that seems so permanent to us. And if you ever watch the Discovery Channel, they have, or I think it's the History Channel or Discovery Channel, they have these different series about what it's like if humanity disappeared tomorrow. What would our cities look like in 50 years or 100 years or 200 years? As nature just basically reclaims. So my point there is that there is an urge, a divine urge is probably the best way that we can think of it. There's a divine urge to be expressed through nature that cannot and will not be denied. Someone once asked Dr. Holmes after the use of nuclear force in World War II. They asked Dr. Holmes, they said, don't you think it's possible that humanity now has the power to completely destroy itself, that it might do that? That we might completely destroy all human life on this planet as it exists. And he said, yes, that's possible. And they said, well, doesn't that concern you? And he said, well, not really, because the desire of life to express itself would simply take us to another place, in another form, another planet. We have to understand that what we think we are as humans is we are spiritual beings. And the divine urge to express its life through us will not be denied. Even to the point of if we misuse the wisdom, if we misuse the power, and we completely annihilate all of humanity, life has not been destroyed. Life does and will continue on, and life will find another way to express itself in us, as us, and through us. We must understand that. We must understand that life is not human life. Life is not what exists between the time we inhale for the first time and exhale for the last time. But life is eternal. And life is a divine urge that is expressing itself through us. So what this minister in Atlanta was saying is that when God gives us an idea, this is her way of speaking. When God gives us an idea, it comes fully clothed, like the seed that is fully clothed with whatever it needs in order to express itself. As the seed has an intelligence within it to know what to do to put its little roots into the ground and grow, as the acorn knows how to become a mighty forest. The divine ideas that come to us come fully clothed. They too have the ability to reach out and to attract to themselves everything that is required for their fulfillment. The money, the material, the goods, the services, the helpmates, the volunteers, the additional ideas. Everything. Everything. There's another passage in the New Testament, you might remember, where the disciples were telling Jesus, you know, we understand what you're saying about prayer and meditation and religious ideas and being with God, but you know, we have bills to pay, we have families to raise, we have boats we have to fix and paint, we have nets we have to mend, we need money to live. And Jesus' reply to them was, don't you think the Father in heaven knows you need these things? Seek first the kingdom, right? Seek first the awareness of the presence of God within. And all of this will be provided and more. What he was telling them is to stop thinking of their lives as a human endeavor that needs to be dealt with in human terms, and start recognizing that you are a spiritual being. And that as a spiritual being, if we can get our ego and our intellect out of the way, because that's what hinders us, if we can get our ego and our intellect out of the way, then all that is required shall make its appearance in the appropriate time, in the appropriate way. Now, what happens to us sometimes is we hear these ideas and we think, well, that's great because I'm going to go and quit my job tomorrow and I'm just going to go and be a perfect expression of life. And it's God's responsibility to feed me and to clothe me. And in fact, in essence, that is a true statement, right? The divine put us here, the divine cares for us, the divine did not abandon us and will not abandon us. But what we have to remember is that what hinders us is our human consciousness. What hinders us is what we think and believe in our heart. And if we don't change what we think and believe in our heart, and we just run out and say, okay, God, I'm your problem, you take care of me now, in our heart we're thinking and believing this isn't going to happen. There's just no way. Right? I don't see how this is going to happen. If I don't get up and go to work in the morning, I don't see how a paycheck's going to come to me. So that's what we continue to think and believe in our heart. And because that's what we continue to think and believe in our heart, even though we kind of go out and dare God to do it, it won't happen because we don't believe it. So Emma Curtis Hopkins gives us some really great instruction on this. She says we have to know that the world has made its living for millennia. The world has made its living by material means. But the day is coming when the world will make its living entirely by spiritual means. By spiritual means, I believe she means recognizing our unity with life, with God. Recognizing that there is an intelligence within us that is unstoppable. If we will get, as Emerson said, our bloated nothingness out of the way. And what Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us is, if you find yourself working your life by material means, and you start to awaken to the idea that there's another way, a spiritual way, don't quit your business, don't quit your job, but continue to swing the hammer until God takes it out of your hand. Continue to do your physical work until you have developed spiritually to the point where your physical work is no longer required. And we do that in several ways. We do that through our prayer, we do that through our meditation, and we do that for recognizing everyone and everything as an instrument of God in action. Every dollar that comes into our hand is divine love in action. Every dollar that goes out of our hand is divine love in action. Every bite of food that we eat is the very divine taking the form of the food. So our blessing of the food is not us conferring anything upon the food that is not already there. It is our realization that the food that we eat is the activity of God that has come to sustain this body that is God's instrument of love and activity and of peace and of joy in this world. So it is making a conscious effort to recognize that we are in a spiritual universe, that we are spiritual beings living in a spiritual universe, and that everyone and everything about us is spirit in action. How does the acorn know to become a forest? How does the sea oat know to push its way up through the asphalt? There is a power behind it, pushing it, and it has no choice but to go forward. And at some point we come to recognize that there's a power behind us, pushing us, that has no choice but to go forward. Now the other thing that happens when people hear these ideas is they think, oh great, all of God is for me and none of God is against me. And they try to think that, well, God must want to do what it is that they want to do. Buy that new car, buy that new house, defeat their enemies, all the kind of things that you read about in the Bible. A book of spiritual psychology, as Emmett Fox tells us. So we have to look at the ideas that we have, and we have to say, how do we know that this is a divine idea, or is it my human ego, telling me that God wants me to have this $1 million, and the kind of things that we see people do. And there's two ways that we know. One is, how did we get the idea? Where did it come to us? Have we been engaged in prayer and meditation? Have we been still? Have we gone within and opened ourselves up and said, not my will, but thine? What is it you would have me do now? How might divine love express itself through me? See, in human terms, in the human consciousness, in the human way of living, life is about getting something that's out there and bringing it in here. We have to go out there and get our food. We have to go out there and get our money. We have to go out there and get our power. We have to do all these things, but we have to go out in the world. We have to manipulate. We have to drive. We have to work hard. We have to make it happen. And when we come to the spiritual realization, we realize that life is not about getting at all. Life is about giving. Life is the love of God giving of itself as us and through us. So we start to recognize then that the divine idea is going to be an idea of giving, not an idea of getting, an idea of giving. How is love going to give of itself through you and as you today, and through me and as me today? And this is why Dr. Holmes tells us, when we have an idea, ask ourselves, does it give a greater expression? Right? He said give. Does it give a greater expression to life or love or truth or beauty? Is this idea giving more of God's activity in this world? Should answer yes to at least one of those. Does this idea try to harm or take anything away from anyone? And we should answer no to both of those. And if this idea that has come to us is an idea that is giving a greater expression of life or love or truth or beauty, and it harms no one, takes nothing away from anyone, then all of God is for us, and none of God is against us. Now what happens to us at this point is that we let things hinder us sometimes. We let life get in the way. We say, God is trying to express itself through me as joy. God is trying to express itself through me as love. But how am I going to get paid? How am I going to make money at that? Frequently people would come to our classes and our workshops, and I'm thinking back when we were in Durham, and they would say, well, they wanted to be an actor. They wanted to act. And of course, we always ask, drill this down a little bit. What is it about acting? What is the quality of God that acting allows you to express? What is it that you want to do? And you think of it in terms of, well, I want to do this, but really there's something deeper driving it. And for acting, it might be a desire. At a human level, it might be a desire for recognition, but at a divine level, and you gotta sort through that. Right? At the divine level, it might be a desire to give joy, to express joy, to help people to smile. And people would come to us and say, I really think that I want to be an actor. And we'd say, well, what are you doing about that? There's lots of opportunities to act around here. There's a children's theater down in Raleigh. Have you gone and auditioned? Have you sent them your resume? There was a lady in the Durham church who had an organization together, a not-for-profit organization that went into the hospitals in Chapel Hill and in Durham, and they entertained the children. They went into the children's ward and they entertained children. And they read them stories, and they brought them stories on cassette tape recorders, and some of them dressed up as clowns, and some of them did magic tricks. But they were expressing joy. See, they were bringing that joy into the hospital. I would say to people, have you thought about going and volunteering for this work? Have you thought about going into the hospital and using your desire to act as a gift to little children who can use some cheering up, who can use a reason to smile? And they would say, oh, no, I'm not thinking about that because no one's going to pay me to do that. See, what did you let hinder you? The idea is that if I give the gift that God gave me, that somebody needs to pay me in return for that gift. And that's a human idea. That's not a divine idea. Our good may come to us one way while we're giving our good another. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your good, and let God provide. Let the divine provide by whatever way it needs to provide. So find a way to give the essence of whatever it is that this divine idea is, and let that grow within you. Let that start to consume you. Let that start to become your passion. And over time, what will happen is the ways and means will appear. Swing your hammer until God takes it from your hand, but find a way to give the gifts that you truly want to give. So what happens, see, is nothing can stop that seed. Nothing can stop that CO from coming up through the ash bowl. Nothing can stop the ivy from putting its little tentacles in the bricks and eventually crumbling the bricks. There is a desire of life to give of itself that is unstoppable. And when we forget that we are part of it, when we identify with the human I am instead of the divine I am, we allow ourselves to be hindered. We allow ourselves to be stopped. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're spending time in our spiritual practice, in our prayer, in our meditation, in our gratitude of blessing everyone and everything that we see, in our awareness of the activity of spirit about us. And this is a wonderful time of the year to do that because everything is blooming. Look at the abundance of God in action as pollen on your car. My goodness. How many tons and tons and tons of this green stuff that the trees put out? Certainly a lot more than they need to cross-pollinate. But yet there's a whole other form of life in the soil that needs and depends on the self-givingness of spirit through that abundance for its life. So learn to identify with the abundance of God. Learn to identify with the self-givingness of God. Learn to recognize that that includes you and that needs you, that you are an important part of the divine expression, and that there is some way, something for you to give. And open yourself up to giving that, and find a way to give the essence of whatever that is right now without regard to whether you get paid for it or not. and do it to the best of your ability right now, whether you get paid for it or not. And find the joy of life fulfilling itself as you in that activity. And keep reminding yourself that God is giving of itself through you as that activity, and nothing can stop God. Whatever problems you think need to be solved, the divine mind knows the answer to. Whatever resources you think you need, the abundance of God knows how to fulfill. But our job is really to identify with the spiritual side and not the human side. The ego is always going to tell us what we have to struggle against. The intellect is always going to tell us what's wrong with the idea. But the love of God is simply going to press on, like the sea oat pressing up through the asphalt. So what do you identify with? What do you let hinder you? I invite you this week, identify with the self-givingness of God. Identify with the outpicturing of love. Recognize yourself as an expression of joy. And anything and everything in your consciousness that comes to tell you no, tell it, get thee behind me, Satan. I'm not listening to ideas that would divide. For the divine love put me here at this time and in this place, and it knows how to use me for its purpose, for its good, for its self-expression. And I tune into that in my prayer, in my meditation, in my studies, and in every idea that passes through my mind every day. Accept only the good, leave the rest behind. You are God's love in action, and nothing can stop you when you are aligned with the unstoppable power of God. And so it is. Alrighty. Let's see here. What did I do? What did I do with the closing treatment that Reverend Roy gave me? Alrighty. I misplaced the book. So we'll go ahead and do a closing treatment. Let us come to recognize that that which we call the divine is unstoppable omnipotence. It is constantly pushing out, expressing itself in new and in different ways. And all of its creation is an instrument of the self-expression of God. And that includes us. We are a very important part of that self-givingness. For we can choose which ideas to accept, which ideas to allow to come into expression through us and as us. And we can willingly participate in the creative process. So this very day, we invite Spirit to reveal to us in the secret place of the Most High within us, to reveal to us that which ought to be done through us. We release and let go of every and any idea that tells us that we must figure it out, we must do it on our own, and we leave ourselves open to divine inspiration and to divine help as the ideas come to us freely. The ideas that tell us how to do it, that show us how to do it, the people who come into our lives to help us to do it, the resources that make their way to us as they make their way to the roots of the oak tree. We recognize that the divine has created us out of itself for the purpose of expressing its life through us and as us. And we release and let go of the idea that we are only human. Today we accept ourselves as divine beings, expressions of God in action. And we allow God to have its way with us, using us for its purpose, for its joy, for its life, and for its love. We are grateful to recognize ourselves as these instruments of giving. We are grateful to recognize that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And this word is a declaration of our belief that sets in motion this law to produce whatever change or changes as needs must be in our consciousness and in all consciousness, to open ourselves up to be the best expression of God's life and love and truth and beauty that we can possibly be. We release this word to that power so certain it is already done, that we say together, and so it is.